many weapons in Elden Ring. And since there's many weapons, From Software is always on the unending task in the pursuit of figuring how could we balance a game that has quite literally hundreds of weapons in it. One of the beautiful things that Elden Ring has, and one thing that I think that a lot of developers could learn from Software is how they are creative when it comes to making a weapon unique or special. Some weapons have different types of attacks or special effects that are not only based on the regular triforce of things that we have, for example, bleeding or poison or like the usual kind of status ailments you have. There's weapons in here that have bleeding, there's weapons in here that have frostbite, but there's also weapons that bypass shields. There's also weapons that deal more damage to dragons. There's also weapons that you have to charge to unleash the final potential of the weapon, like Euphoria. I'd say that the staple this weapon has is an interesting one that they never really did manage to pull off because the weapon is kind of crappy. I'd say that if you want to have something like this, you're better off with an Ash of War. I'm speaking about, of course, the Horned Warrior's Greatsword, and let's talk about the pros and the cons that this weapon has. It has been buffed. It has been buffed on the latest patch, the 1.13 patch, I believe. And they basically increase the damage because they want to make it battle. Damage, it's not that bad, it's just the overall idea of the weapon that's really bad. And the overall concept of what is it that it's adding to the table, it's actually not that bad either. It's about storms, and storms are missing, at least when it comes to exploration. Because what is it that storms do? Storms unbalance enemies. And if you're fighting, for example, the elite enemies, the heavily knight armors that are enemies that are very difficult to stagger, this is an excellent option because you can stun lock them, and stun locking something is very powerful, although there's better ways of stun locking something in this game. That being said, that's what it's going to do. However, it's not that amazing when it comes to bosses because you cannot stagger bosses with winds. And also, the poise value of the weapon, the poise damage that the weapon has, it's really not that amazing, at least not the Ash of War. It has a total of 57.2 stance damage, divided on 3 separate hits. The first animation is going to be 24.2, and then 16.5, and then 16.5. What's the issue with that? The damage is decent, but what makes this a mid-weapon is that the animation takes like 54 years for you to complete it. So more often than not, you're not going to complete the animation. If you properly buff your character, like we're doing so with this build, once you complete the animation, you can deal up to 10k damage on the complete animation, but like I said, you're not going to be able to complete it because it takes for the second coming of our Savior Lord Jesus Christ before you actually complete the animation. So that's something that's not going to happen. If you're trying to use it with your Mimic tier, for example, remember that the AI has been revamped in Elden Ring. Specifically, I've noticed that on the DLC, that as soon as the boss finds that you're doing something that you're triggering, like an attack animation, it's going to change the aggro and phase towards you. And the Ash of War doesn't have that much of what we could call hybrid armor or poise, incrementing poise. So you are going to get interrupted. Can you use it like the first animation and be efficient with it? I mean, it's going to be 3 to 4k damage, it's nice, but more than not, the recovery frames that you have for this, it's going to have to require for you to trade hits with the enemies, and especially if you're taking advantage of those windows of opportunity of the bosses where they finish a big attack and they have more recovery frames that they have to go through, that's still not going to be enough for you to complete the animation. So it's a very mid weapon. I'm making this build just in case you're interested in it, but I don't recommend the weapon at all. So the stats. It scales with a B on strength. We have a regular strength build. We're nearly reaching the hard cap right there, although we're two-handing. Remember that if you want to have like 63 damage, that's going to be more than enough for you to be able to have 99 if you two-hand the weapon because of the 50% more strength that you have right there. But in here, just because of the stats, that is not a heavy stat-hungry build, because it's just a regular strength build, we're sprinkling points evenly in between mind, endurance, vigor 60, strength 70, and we're also dexterity 16, that's a weapon requirement, and faith, because we want to buff our character with the basic buffs that we always use. For the equipment, I'm not particularly using any shields, because I'm two-handing the weapon with this build, so yeah. That's nice. I'm also using a finger seal that's not upgraded for us to be able to buff our character. And I've noticed that this combo that we have right here, the Oathseeker Knight Armor with the Commoner's Headbands, the Knight Gauntlets, and then the Greaves of Solitude, that's 51 poise. But if you want to, you can also toy around in here. This right now, as it is, this is basic 51 poise. You can also be using the complete Knight Armor set, that is also going to be 51 points. What do you know? We're actually using a couple of DLC talismans. Specifically the Enraged Divine Beast. This increases the damage of our storms that we use with the Ash of War of this weapon. And it's also, I forgot to mention on the overall overview weapon, that it's great for exploration because the AoE of the attack, it's actually kind of nice, and you're going to be incrementing the damage of the AoE with the Enraged Divine Beast. The 200 Sword Talisman is not going to affect on itself the Ash of War, which is what you're going to be using more often than not, but it's nice extra damage, and the weapon has it has decent AR damage, it's not that bad. And then we have the Shadow of Alexander, and for the final slot you can use the overall utility, the support kind of talismans that you would regularly use. That being said, the Total Talisman, the Dragon Crest, the Urtu's Favor if you want to slot a shield in here, upgrade your arsenal if you want to use somewhat of a heavier shield or heavier armor, and what have you. This is where you're going to be using your supplementary kind of talisman. Flame grant me strength to increase our physical damage by 20%. We're not taking advantage of the extra 20% damage for our fire damage, but it's still 20% extra damage, and most of our Ash of War is based on percentage physical damage, so that's actually kind of nice. The weapon, even though that it has scaling with faith, it doesn't have any divided damage in between holy damage, it's just pure physical damage. And then we have Golden Bow that increases our damage by 15%. You're able to use this thanks to the Fate Not Crystal tier that we'll discuss in a little while, and yes, as a matter of fact, let's talk about that now. For the crystal tiers, there's not many things that we can have in here, although I advise for the Strength Not Crystal tier, so that you increase your strength to 80, that's the hard cap, and ideally it's not going to be 80, it's going to be 140 because of the extra 50% strength when you're two-handing a weapon. But beyond 99, beyond 80, it really doesn't matter that much, so you might as well be one-handing the weapon and using a shield and still get the most advantage out of the weapon right here. It's still going to substantially increase your damage if you have 140 strength and then the 200 Sword Talisman. The Fate Not Crystal tier that will allow us to use Golden Bow with the spells that we'll be using, that which we previously discussed, are the spells that we use with this build. It's a very, very mid weapon. When you're fighting against bosses, you're not going to be able to complete the animation, and if you try to use it with a Mimic tier, you're not going to be able to complete the animation because you're going to be noticed before you actually start the animation, because it takes like 100 years for you to be able to complete the animation. The stagger damage, the stagger potential, it's crappy. It's as crappy as it gets, because for you to be able to stagger a boss, you are required to complete 2 complete animations, 2 complete casts of the animation for you to be able to stagger something that it usually has 100 poise resistance or stance resistance, and for you to get 102 stance damage, you are required to complete the animation, like the 3 casts of the animation, the 3 inputs twice. And yeah, that's not going to happen soon. That's not something that you can rely on when fighting bosses. What is it that this weapon excels at? Exploration. The range, it's amazing. It's tremendous range that it has. It deals excellent damage for exploration, and even if you're fighting against those very, very big elite enemies, if you can like stagger them with the wind of the storm of the weapon, it's something that is going to happen more often than not. So very, very aggressive enemies, that there's many, like those ninja dancing kind of like enemies, you can stagger them, stun lock them with this thing, and it's going to turn them into a wrist. So for exploration, it's just an ideal weapon. But for fighting bosses, I would advise for you to have something as an offhand. So there's that. Anyways, if you like the content, like it, super appreciated. Also, if you are just a beautiful person, you're in the day, just a beautiful, beautiful person, subscribe to the channel, join the Discord. Have a beautiful day, goodbye.